I'm going to quickly go over a couple of top tips for your Turkish get-ups. So if you struggle with Turkish get-ups, so there's a couple of sticking points where you find that you can't quite get stable and organised or to move on to the next bit, then I'm going to give you some pointers for a couple of common sticking points where you might be struggling. So the first one is going to be the transition from lying down to getting up onto that wrist. And one of the common issues here is trying to stay square on. So trying to keep both my shoulders pointing at the ceiling or my chest pointing at the ceiling and trying to sit straight up from this position. And that makes things a lot harder. One of the elements of the Turkish get-up which we're trying to work on is shoulder stability whilst moving around the shoulder, moving the kettlebell around the shoulder. So what you want to be thinking about in this initial bit of the get-up is turning onto your side. So you're going to press the kettlebell to the ceiling, but you're also there's going to be some rotation at the shoulder. So into this kind of stacked shoulder position, rather than trying to stay square on and coming off center and coming off that stable position. So instead of trying to sit up and the kettlebell drifting forwards and putting a lot more strain on the shoulder, we're going to come up to the side, and it allows us to keep the kettlebell directly over the shoulder, and that makes things a lot easier to allow us to get up for the next bit. So that's top tip number one, is we want to be coming onto the side to get into that seated position versus trying to sit up into that seated position. So that's the first one. Second one, a lot of people struggle getting their other leg underneath them to get into that half kneeling position. So once I'm sat up tall, hips come up, and I want to bring this knee underneath to get into this position so I can then transition to half kneeling. Common reason people struggle with that, see a lot of people struggling to get the foot underneath and even coming to this kind of end up sitting forward onto both knees to stand up. One of the reasons you might be struggling to get that foot underneath is, again, because we're trying to keep our hips square and pointing at the ceiling. So it's a similar thing. We want to rotate the hips to allow yourself open some space up to get underneath. So if I try and stay square, I find it really hard to get my foot underneath and get that knee where I need it to be. Whereas if I turn my hips, still got my foot planted and I'm stable, but I can now scoot this leg underneath because I've turned my hips to the side to come to that position. So, in summary, to get from the lying position onto the wrist, we're going to turn side on to get us into that starting position. And then to come from here to half kneeling, I'm going to turn my hips to the side to allow me to get underneath my hip so I can get to half kneeling, so I can then stand up. And that is a couple of little tips for your Turkish get-up. If you get those incorporated, you should find you can do maybe a heavier weight or do them more smoothly and more efficiently. So there you go, a couple of little pointers for your get-ups.